Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Complicated Creation. This will be part 11, chapter 9, entitled Break the Ice. Izuku's still not sure about any of this, but Eraserhead, no, Aizawa now. He has a name now. He keeps saying he has it all figured out, and it isn't so much that Izuku wants to trust him as Izuku wants it to be true. If there's some way to make this better, he wants it. He doesn't want to be cold all winter, and know how hungry someone can get, and smell like cigarette smoke and alcohol when he has a roof over his head, and be covered in bug bites when he doesn't. Those things were always just better than the alternatives, but now Aizawa's offering him something else, and Izuku's afraid, sure, but while he isn't strong, he is not such a coward as to run away from this without trying. And besides, he doesn't have anything like enough power to run right now anyway. It'll be a few days before he can. Modifying quirks and interacting with spirits doesn't take much, but fighting and travel are draining as hell. So if Aizawa has a plan, he might as well not argue it, right? He's just considering his options. The flight is uneventful, so much so that he falls asleep on it, dozing for an hour before they land, and Aizawa puts them in a cab to go home instead of taking the train. Izuku wonders about that, if maybe he's trying to help him avoid people. But then again, Aizawa looks worse than Izuku does, so maybe he wants to avoid people for himself. Izuku drifts off once more, and wakes in Musutafu. They step out into the late afternoon air, and Izuku finds himself looking at an unassuming house across from some low-rise apartments in a quiet-looking neighborhood. Tama Monome is waiting for him by the front gate. She declined to keep pace with the car or plane. "Everyone is waiting for you both," she says, and sure enough, the front door opens a moment later, and Present Mike, though he's in civilian clothes, appears and rushes down the path to look at Aizawa over the gate. The two of them have a moment where they just stare, Aizawa unblinking, Present Mike looking Aizawa up and down repeatedly before finally sighing in relief. "Thank goodness." "You didn't believe me." Aizawa motions for Mike to open the gate, which he does. "I'd say I'm hurt, but you'll just take that literally." He's pretty good at the deadpan. Izuku laughs. "This is Deku," Aizawa continues, hand instantly on Izuku's back. "Deku, this is Hisashi Yamada, though you know him as Present Mike." "Hi there, little listener," Yamada says, the voice so familiar, it makes Izuku smile. "You can call me Hisashi if you want." That's so incredibly informal for a hero, Izuku sputters, and Aizawa saves him by nudging them all forward. "Let's get inside before Ashtray makes a break for it." "Ashtray?" Izuku follows them up the steps. "We have cats," Aizawa says, and adds almost as an afterthought, but he's frowning with worry. "You're not allergic, are you?" "I don't think so. I never had a cat, but I pet them before, and that's been okay." "Well, we'll find out soon enough." Izuku's offered a pair of house slippers once inside, and the home is nice. Aizawa all but drags him to the kitchen, past Totoshi, who waves and pretends to focus on his phone, but Izuku can tell he's watching Aizawa intently. The dark circles under his eyes look worse than before, too. "Just as you ordered," Yamada Hisashi says, gesturing to the takeout bags on the counter. "Ramen from your favorite place, and enough side dishes to feed a whole class." Aizawa nods at the bags next to Izuku. "Help me unpack this. I don't care if we didn't get hungry before. I feel like I haven't eaten in 4 days. Yeah, that gets kind of weird, especially when I stay a while," Izuku agrees while helping load the table up with an impressive amount of food. "I didn't know what you'd like," Aizawa tells him, while he and Yamada unload other bags. "And I know these two probably ignored food while I was gone, so there'll be enough for all 4 of us, and you can just pick at what you want." Izuku's mouth is watering. Everything smells so good, and yet it feels wrong somehow. He'd kind of sort of kidnapped Aizawa and left them to worry for 4 days, and he'd attacked Hitoshi at the police station, and now they're sitting around a table with a mound of food, and Hitoshi and Yamada are looking at them expectantly, and Aizawa's giving him a pointed look at the food, and Izuku really wants to eat, but he's suddenly nauseous, and Hitoshi taps him gently on the shoulder, but he still startles up. The other boy doesn't seem surprised at all, though, and blinks laconically. "Bathroom is next to the front door." Izuku mutters a quick excuse and runs for it before he can forget how to breathe. He doesn't have anything in his stomach to throw up, so he just sits on the toilet with his face in his hands and gets all of 3 seconds of peace before a spirit prods his knees with a claw. If they're going to let you stay here, you better not mess things up, Corruptor. The mental voice is a genderless croak. Izuku looks up to see a kappa, and, oh, it's Present Mike's spirit. He's seen it once before, just a glimpse of it next to the hero when he'd been at a mall reopening his mother had taken him to. It's short and green and angry, and wearing a metal cap to protect its Sara, turtle-beaked mouth snapping at him menacingly. I'm not going to put up with you making this place a mess, monster child, Tamamo-no-Me's head comes through the bathroom wall, and she simply takes the kappa by the shell, shakes it a few times like a cat with a kill, and then throws it away. Izuku giggles, more a release of tension than anything else, and Tamamo-no-Me regards him with baleful eyes, only her head and shoulders fitting in the small bathroom, and the rest of her elsewhere. She nudges him in the chest with her nose. Why did you run? You must eat. I don't know. Izuku tentatively reaches to brush a hand against her head, and when she closes her eyes and leans into it, he strokes her fur a bit more intentionally. It just doesn't feel right. To eat a meal with friends? For them to be okay with me? Izuku shrugs. I'm not a friend. I don't belong here. There's a knock on the bathroom door. Eraser. Aizawa's voice is quiet through the wall. You all right in there, problem child? At least I live up to my name, he tells Tamamo-no-Me miserably. She nudges him with her snout hard. Hey! Give them a chance, young kid, she tells him firmly. Give them a chance to give you a chance as well, or my human will chase you all over Japan and I will find a way to help him. Deku, Aizawa knocks again. I'm okay. Izuku leans back and stares up at the ceiling. She's scolding me at the moment. Sounds like you're in good hands, then, Aizawa offers, which makes Izuku laugh. Still would like you to come out and eat, but if you need some space, I can make you a plate and we can sit on the balcony. I don't know what to say to them, Izuku admits, hands still buried in the kitsune's soft fur. What if they don't believe me? Let me worry about that. I told you I had a plan, didn't I? And Aizawa did say that several times, and Izuku wants to know, but at the same time he's afraid. Trust him, Tamamo-no-Me says. But you do not have to do so blindly. What? I said. No, I was talking to Tamamo-no-Me, sorry. Izuku laughs awkwardly again and opens the bathroom door. Ask him, the spirit says as she moves out of the way. Izuku looks up at Aizawa, who looks down at him concerned. Aizawa trusted him when he dragged the hero through the spirit realm. He can try to do the same here. She says I should ask you what your plan is, because I'm scared. Aizawa nods slowly. All right. I was going to run it past you after we ate, but we can talk it over now while we find you a change of clothing. Shinso, he calls out to be heard. We're raiding your closet. Touch my cat hoodie and die, is the response called back as Yamada cackles. Come on, and tell Tamamo-no-Me we'll need her too. Aizawa gestures for Izuku to follow him upstairs. We can workshop my plan and you can shower and get changed, and then you can eat something. I don't want you at the precinct on an empty stomach. The quirk suppression cuffs click shut around his wrists and Izuku breathes in and out as steadily as he can. Still with me? Aizawa asks him quietly, and Izuku looks up into his eyes and sees Tamamo-no-Me behind him, human-looking. He didn't even know she could do that until he'd changed forms in Hitoshi's room and laughed at his surprise. We'll make this quick. Izuku nods. He really wishes he'd skipped dinner because they're back at Isumatsu Police Station, just like when all this started. And while it isn't the same interrogation room, this one is bigger. It has the added stress of a lot more people in it, and spirits. Everyone is staring at them, as Aizawa has him cuffed in the back of the room away from the table where they all sit waiting. There's the detective from before, with the orange cat spirit, Hitoshi and Zar, Yamada and his kappa, all varying degrees of familiar. There's also the R-rated hero Midnight, who has an American-style naga, Gorgon, he thinks, as a spirit draped in silk and hundreds of snakes for hair. That spirit had taken one look at Izuku and hissed with all of her snakes, and then Tamamo-no-Me had said something to her privately, and she just vanished. Izuku's going to take that as a win. Of course, then there's Mr. Principal of UA, sipping at a cup of tea, spiritless at the moment. Izuku's grateful. He gets a sense his spirit is probably something terrifying and huge. As debriefings go, this is going to be one of the oddest I've done, the detective says. Tsukauchi, Izuku recalls with some effort. But we're all here, Eraserhead, and we want to know what happened and what this is about. Aizawa stands beside Deku, hand on his shoulder for support. Right. The man nods at the group. Well, you're not going to like the answers much, but you're a man who prides himself on the truth, so we'll start with this. Everything Deku here told us months ago was true. He's not a Nomu, doesn't have anything to do with any of the villain groups, and by all accounts, quirks really are spirits. Izuku ducks his head as Tsukauchi gives Aizawa a look of disbelief. What? It's going to be easier if I showed you, Aizawa says and nods to Izuku. Okay, problem child. Izuku looks to Tamamonome, who nods back at him. He holds out his cuffed hands and Aizawa rolls up his sleeves and wipes at the sigil there with an alcohol wipe. It leaves him helpless. A week ago he'd never willingly do this. Last time he'd been here, he'd been caught without, and it had been bad, but he trusts Aizawa and Tamamonome to protect him. He trusts them enough to sound steady when he nods at the hero and even manages a weak smile. Ready. There is so much trust he's been given, Shota knows, and he's going to make it count. Right. Midnight, would you use your quirk on Deku, please? Her eyebrows rise above her mask, but she stands and reaches for the kid, curious but trusting in Shota and the favor he'd called in to have her come in. He owes her a full month of grading at this point, but worth it. He's got to stack the deck here. Deku doesn't try to fight her quirk, and he's so clearly overexhausted that he's asleep in Kayama's arms in moments, quickly enough that she croons in amusement as he curls in her grip. She runs a thumb under Deku's bruised eyes for a moment. No doubt she can see just as well as Shota that the kid's not in the best shape. And then she looks up at him. What exactly does all this have to do with you disappearing for 4 days? You weren't involved with our first interaction with Deku, he tells her, and looks instead to Tsukauchi. But you saw the report we put out after the fact. We thought Deku might be a person of interest. What we actually thought was that he might be the result of a genetic or quirk manipulation, an escapee from one of the League's twisted labs. He tried to tell us the truth, but it was so improbable, we assumed he was brainwashed. He told us quirks were the result of magical spirits, Tsukauchi points out. You're saying that's true. I'm saying it is true, and it's provable, or at least something close enough to it is. Aizawa points to Deku. He's asleep, he's cuffed, and Aizawa activates his own quirk. I'm suppressing his quirk. By any statement, he shouldn't be able to do anything, agreed? Hisashi frowns. Didn't you think he had an accomplice? Shota nods. We did, but that never entirely made sense to me, and it really isn't going to make sense now. Tamamonome, he asks, and hopes this works the way they tried it in Shinso's room. Gently. He watches as Deku seems to float out of Kayama's lap, knees and shoulders high and legs dangling. He knows why. He can imagine the shape of the spirit holding Deku in her arms, a spirit working with them and not against him, even as the whole room stares and Hisashi pushes up from his chair in surprise. Tsukauchi is immediately moving in on Deku. He comes around the table and reaches out to find nothing under the kid or around the kid. There's no invisible person, Shota points out. Though I did think that at first. It doesn't actually make sense. I have an invisible student, and I can usually guess where she is, what she's doing. There's a sense you have when there's someone around, even invisibly. We could have an incorporeal person like Mirio, but how are they also invisible and capable of holding Deku up? And if you're going to suggest that someone has a telekinesis quirk that works without line of sight and from a distance far enough to be outside of the precinct, that's a stretch, but an understandable stretch. Don't worry, we can go one further. Shota pulls out an empty chair. The spirit carries him to it and settles him down, and Shota pushes the chair and arranges Deku's sleeping form to lay forward on the table, with his cuffed hands out to the side. Write a question in your notebook, he tells Tsukauchi, stepping back. Then put the notepad and pen by his hands. Aizawa, what? Shota sighs. This is the sort of thing that's going to take time, I'm aware, so let's just get the basics out of the way first, all right? He points to Deku. Just do it. Tsukauchi obliges. Shota keeps away from line of sight of the book and what question is written, and the pad is set by Deku's hands. A moment later, they very clumsily pick up the pen, and one hand curls around it in the way that it might if someone else were moving the fingers. The written response is hardly neat, but the movements are quite definite. Eraserhead. Nezu has not moved from his seat, neither has Shinso for that matter. Are you going to explain matters, or is this simply to be a series of fascinating tests with no clear goal? The point is, we could do this in a quirk-dampening cell. We could put Deku in a coma, I'm guessing in Tartarus, and we could do this. At this point, we either have to assume he has under his control a teleportation quirk, a recording interference quirk, the ability to modify quirks, the ability to cancel quirks, the ability to float, and the ability to move and hear and read while asleep, with a toe joint, I'll add. All while wearing quirk-suppressing cuffs and while I've been canceling him. Or, Aizawa blinks, dry eyes, as his own quirk ends. There's something else going on. Magic, Aizawa. Tsukauchi asks, but he doesn't sound half so disbelieving now. He's staring at his notebook and whatever was written there. Don't call it magic if it bugs you. I don't like it, but I don't have a better name for it yet. Quirks are basically magic we've attached the evolution label to, even though we barely understand them. The point is, this kid isn't what we thought he was, and can do things we thought were impossible yesterday. And he needs help. Nezu's intelligent eyes seem to light up. What do you mean by that exactly? I mean, at the end of the day, Shota shakes his head. At the end of the day, something he told me at the start of our little adventure is true. That what he can see doesn't matter, in the grand scheme of things. What he knows about how quirks work could be important, if we get enough people to believe it, but at the end of the day, it wouldn't change the vast majority of any of our lives, and the process would destroy him. It doesn't matter where our quirks come from. For most of the world, what matters is if we have them, and if they work. Shota pulls out the chair next to Deku and sits down. Tsukauchi has no choice but to do the same. This is a kid who has a power that has immense potential for harm, who has spent his whole life desperately trying not to. He could have turned against all of us at any time, but he didn't, because at his core, he wants to do good, and the world hasn't done him any favors. I'm saying I watched him give a young girl with a broken emitter quirk the ability to turn her quirk on and off at will, then stop her asthma attack, and he didn't think any of that was anything special. The whole room stares at Shota. They're listening. Good. I'm saying we need to look after him, and that means we need to believe him, even if that means you have to think of it as his quirk lets him see quirks as manifestations of power, and occasionally he can use them for himself. We have literally faced Stranger, All for One, for example. You're saying this kid has magic? Kayama leans into Deku, who's still sound asleep. Shota figures he probably needs it. He looks so cute like this. How could anyone think he was a Nomu? It was a working theory, Tsukauchi points out, a little defensive, given what we knew at the time. Now we know better, and we need to do better. The point of all this is to give you an idea of what I'm calling his reality, because it's different from ours, but it's still very real, and if you don't understand it, the rest of my report is going to sound absolutely insane. Shota lifts one shoulder at the detective when he gives a concerned look. Izashi and Shinso are here because they need to understand, because I'm keeping Deku with us, for as long as he'll willingly stay. Kayama, everyone understands your quirk and it's safer than trying to drug him, especially right now, and Nezu. Shota meets the principal's gaze, and suspects he doesn't need to say anything. He already knows. Once we know where Deku is and have him caught up, I'm sponsoring him for UA. Excellent. Nezu presses his fingers together. I'm sure he'll be a very interesting addition to our student body. It's to protect him, Shota says with such intensity everyone pauses. I mean it. We were worried about him being the product of the villains. Well, imagine what they could do with someone who can permanently manipulate quirks. We don't need another All for One. Everyone looks at Deku, still asleep. Are you seriously worried this kid's going to turn into the world's next big bad villain while he's drooling on the table? Shinso asked sharply. Because that seems a bit hypocritical. No. Shota meets Shinso's gaze and doesn't flinch. I'm saying if Shigaraki or the next Chiseki find out about Deku, he's going to suffer if we aren't careful, and the kid's suffered enough. Tsukauchi leans back in his chair, thoughtful. So how do you think we should proceed? Shota reaches over and gently shakes Deku awake, which actually takes some effort. While Deku blinks, Shota uncuffs him and hands him a marker, which Deku uses to immediately draw on himself. While he does so, Shota continues his longest pre-debrief in history. I'm saying we register him with a baseline quirk, Call it quirk personification, power registration, quirk analysis, I don't care. But get him registered so that there's paperwork, and then we close his case and let him be an actual kid again and train him. Do you want to be a hero, Deku? Nezu asks, warm and interested. I think someone with your skill set could certainly be an interesting one. Deku looks at the principal, and then back to Shota. I don't know. I did, when I was a kid, but a lot of what I can do is limited and hurting, spirits because their humans are making trouble. I don't know. He shakes his head and looks at his hands. I thought maybe I could be a quirk therapist, someone who helps people when their quirks are too much for them, or don't work in a way that they understand. Or if someone tries to make those bullets again, I could help with that. I can fix things. I want to help people. Kayama gets a gleam in her eye, and Shota glares at her, and she doesn't say what she'd been thinking. He'd warned everyone before they'd arrived, not to mention Mirio or Eri, one damn thing at a time. Well, I'm sure we'll have lots of time to discuss your further education later, once you are settled with Eraserhead. Nezu smiles, all charm even in the face of Deku's clear uncertainty. He's never sponsored a student before, only because Shinso wanted to get into UA on his own terms, and Hisashi had fought tooth and nail to be able to be the one to sponsor their kid instead. That had been a long few weeks of debate. Anyway, Shota cuts off more flailing from Deku. We need to figure out how to handle our report and debrief as well. At everyone's look, Shota shrugs again. If I tell you verbatim I was transported to another dimension filled with spirits and monsters and literal fucking gods, you know me well enough to at least consider I might be telling the truth. Yes, we need to get my head checked and get Harige in to look at my memories for tampering and the whole lot of it. We have due process for this shit for a reason. He might expect them to give him some benefit of the doubt, but they're still going to check. We need to think about the official records because if that comes in clear, and if this report gets filed as is, the next person who sees it won't necessarily want to believe it no matter who or what vouches for me, and I don't want to be dragging Deku through this process of the public bullshit that might follow. Records aren't sealed by default, after all. Heroes are supposed to have accountability. No one might especially want to look into this case, but if someone does, it can make a hell of a mess for all involved. There's silence as everyone seems to process that, and Shinso is the one to laugh. My God, he's asking for permission to lie from the police detective with the truth quirk. I think we've reached peak irony. Actually, I think it's only ironic if Tsukauchi's the one to suggest it, Hisashi muses. I'm not sure it's subversive enough. Do not get into an irony debate during a debriefing. I don't care how unusual this one is. Shota cuts them off before they can start. We have rules. Kayama puts up a finger. You have rules about debating irony? Shota gives her the most world-weary look he can manage. Don't even ask. They will go for days. I'm certainly not comfortable with this, Tsukauchi agrees. Beyond the law, there are ethics to consider, and... How about Deku and I just tell you what went on for us while we were gone? You can note that down as a temporary statement pending external review to ensure our memories haven't been tainted, and we can at least get things moving. Shota knows this will take time. They're not going to believe all at once. He wouldn't have, without a face-first introduction into Deku's world. All he needs for now is them to be willing to humor him, and not outright dismiss Deku the way they did at first. All right, Tsukauchi says carefully. That's reasonable. Deku? Shinso says, and for his son, the voice is gentle enough that Shota looks at Deku in worry and realizes the kid is clutching his hands together on the table and hunched in on himself. Deku, Shota echoes, reaching to touch because it seems to help the kid ground himself in the here and now. You all right? I didn't mean to cause any trouble, Deku says to the table. I'm really sorry. I've made a mess for everyone and you all think Eraserhead is crazy and it's my fault. Hey now, little listener, no one's allowed to call Shota crazy except me, Hisashi says before Shota can counter Deku's self-blame party fest. And if Shota says you've got spirits, then I'm going to believe him until someone gives me a good reason not to. Deku, you want a drink? Shinso asks, seemingly at random, but Shota knows his son, and random is not one of Shinso's character traits. Deku likewise seems surprised and confused. I'm thirsty, Shinso says, like they're not in a debriefing, like Deku's not having a moment of self-pity and panic. You look like you could use some air. There's a vending machine. Everyone else is staring at Shinso, but Shota looks at Deku and sees the almost feral panic there and decides a breather is probably a good idea. Go get a drink while I give them the rundown. Makes sense. Shota assures when Deku looks at him in confusion. Usually you give a statement separate, so we don't color each other's story. With luck, they'll hear mine and decide they don't want to drag you through the same. Deku shakes his head, but despite his protests, he's already pushing up from the chair. I promised I wouldn't run, and what about... You'll come back in 10. Shota nods his head toward the door. Shinso is already on his feet. Go on. Get something to drink and take a breather. Deku hesitates for another moment, then looks up at nothing. Probably a spirit now that Shota knows how to recognize the signs. Then he bows to everyone and nearly runs out of the door on Shinso's heels. Aizawa? Tsukauchi asks, curious. Better to let him breathe and get a grip on things. Pretty sure this is the largest group of non-aggressive humans he's dealt with in a long time. Shota shrugs. Not like we can hold him if he wanted to even try. Besides, I trust him to come back. All right. The detective looks unconvinced, but doesn't argue. Let's start with your perspective on tracking down Demolition. All right, listeners, this concludes the first half to Chapter 9 of Complicated Creation. The second half to Chapter 9 will be up next. I hope you all are still enjoying this one. Let me know your thoughts and reactions to everything so far. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.